My mother, Mary Lou Parker Ackerman, had this playhouse that her and her sister would play in from the time they were little in the 20s and 30s. The playhouse was originally constructed in about 1922 in DeKalb, Illinois, on Augusta Avenue, where my mother lived as a child. I think we even have some footage somewhere of them giving a little play. I think it was Hansel and Gretel with the playhouse in the background. And my mom had said that the playhouse was sort of the set. It was always where they would have their plays in front of, or they would use it as part of the play. Playhouse was very well constructed. It was made by a man named Jacobson when he was a young carpenter who later went on to build these beautiful brick and stone buildings at Northern Illinois University when he was more successful and older. And so the playhouse was a nice little piece of architecture. I guess it was about 8 feet by 12 feet, about 8 feet tall. At one time the playhouse even had a screened-in porch, and it had flower boxes. But by the time I was born, those things had fallen into disrepair and were torn off. When my mother got married, my grandpa towed it to the new house where my dad and mom lived behind his Jeep on the frozen roads. That was a move of about 2 blocks. Growing up with the playhouse on Thornbrook Road in DeKalb, Illinois, we painted it to match the house where I lived, and all my friends would come and play in the playhouse, and my brother and other neighborhood people, and sometimes my sister got to play in the playhouse too with her doll furniture. But most of the time it was used as the lab where our Mad Scientist Club would launch model rockets and prepare to have Fido the chameleon spend some time underwater in this device we made called the Sea Lab. We made a generator that would power the lights in the playhouse so we could run a radio or fans or lights and that sort of thing. Later we built an underground launch pad that was controlled from the playhouse where we could open and close this trap door that was covered with sod. And we ran a telephone network out of parts that the phone company was getting rid of. And it ran from my bedroom to my best friend's house across a vacant lot, and then also out to the playhouse and to a couple other friends' houses too. We built this all with wire and telephone receivers that the phone company was getting rid of. One day we even had some fellows from the phone company come and have lunch with us. We invited them, and they brought the Big Shot, and they brought Beardsley and Sachs, the 2 fellows that had been giving us parts for the phones. And they even brought a wire installer who was going to put an antenna on the telephone pole behind the playhouse. We weren't ever allowed to go up on the roof because my dad felt that that would make the shingles wear out faster, and we really took care of the playhouse. Well, eventually I grew up and went away to college, and my mom lived there alone at the house with the playhouse. And little by little, as the playhouse aged, it began to fall into some disrepair. So in the 90s, she hired a contracting crew, carpenter and some other guys, and they came out and put new flooring and a new roof on the playhouse and pretty much restored it to its original glory. Well, eventually, after I was gone, Mom had had the playhouse restored, and then she remarried, and her and her new husband decided to buy a house across the street. Well, this is a house where my grandpa had once lived when we were kids, and Grandpa's Jeep was long gone, and so they decided if they were going to move the playhouse, which they really had to do because by now there was so much sentimental value placed on it by 2 generations, they were going to have the playhouse professionally moved. So at this time, a beam was built, a crane hooked up to the beam. The crane lifted the playhouse onto a dump truck, and the dump truck drove from the house where my mom lived across the street to the house where her and her new husband Byron were going to live. And at that time, the playhouse had a new foundation put under it, and again it was put back in just pristine, restored condition at their new home. Well, after Mom lived there a few years, she moved.
Bye.
And
Bye.
her house was going to be put up for sale, and there's some discussion as to whether the Playhouse could be moved again. And at first we thought it was too daunting. Then I began looking at the photos of when the Playhouse was moved from my boyhood home to where Mom and her second husband Byron lived. And we realized the Playhouse could be moved a block, and maybe if it was done right it could be moved a lot further. Now the most logical place to move it seemed to be the cabin at Eagle River, because the cabin had been in our family for generations and it looked like it would stay in the family for a long time to come. The cabin also had space to put the Playhouse, and we spent quite a bit of time up there in the winter, so there'd be people around who could take care of it, and during the summer paint it and see that it was kept in the good shape that it had been in since 1922.